Well, let me continue. Um, so, basically, when you take the second view, even when you are looking to a particular item, particular process, it's necessary to take into account actually the world um, around that process or item or individual is shaping um, its characteristics. And in economics, actually, it is kind of not that much difficult to understand. For example, the value of this book or the value of, for example, the um, money I have might very well depend on the world around me. For example, um, well, when you take for example the tulip mania crisis in the Holland, I believe. A single tulip has become because the market acts a certain way, and you might look if you are interested why this happened. But a single tulip, which is a flower, in Turkish it's called lale. Um, it was as expensive as a house at some point, but then at a very short time, the value of that uh, flower has collapsed and started to worth nothing. And a similar thing also happened in the United States actually recently in the housing crisis. I mean, people were told their houses were actually worth, for example, $1 million, but the value of houses has collapsed, and suddenly the same house was worth, for example, $100,000 instead of $1 million. For example, the weight, not the mass, but the weight of an item depends on the gravity around the item. So it's not the world around that item is determining its weight, basically. So characteristics of objects might change when social relations around that those objects of people or people change. It's just like, I mean, if something changes the gravity and the weight of the individual, the object might change even if the object is the same. And in some cases, properties might be transferred from one thing to other just because the social interactions um, that are um, uh, basically going around those things. For example, um, if something is being sold, kind of we might assume the value that item represents. If I sell this book, I mean, for me, I might have just produced this book in order to earn money. So the potential value of this book when I sell it in the market might be for me the most important property of this book. So if I sell this book, since the actually important thing is the value of this book for me, this book's value might be transformed from the form of book to form of money. So in a way, I mean, the value from me, the exchange value I have in my hand has transformed from one form to another, for example. Um, and in some cases, even the meanings of the concepts might change according to the social framework where it is applied. I mean, well, if someone is father or not might be very much the way the society defines it, or someone is mother or brother, or certain roles people have in society might be basically defined by society. And change in social framework might very well change also the meaning of concepts. I mean, what it means to be a father, for example, or what it means of being a child, basically. Um, And so when we have in some cases, different perspective, when we see things from the perspective of the workers, certain concepts might mean a different thing compared with the case where we have the viewpoint of the capitalist, for example. So when we look to the thing, actually, the process in which we are studying that thing, or the framework in which we use a concept, for example, might define the meaning of the concept. So meanings of the concept also should not be necessarily stable. So all of these things make Marxian economics. These elements are also applied to the Marxian economics, and in some cases, they may make Marxian economics complex. Although, as far as possible, I try to make it relatively more simple for this course, since it's an undergraduate course. And whenever these principles apply, either holism and isolationism principle, the philosophical principles related to holism and isolationism, or principles related to the dialectic materialism, I will mention it and make a brief discussion how Marxian philosophy has been effective in shaping what we have studied. Let's check what we have studied. So this is the end of this lecture. The discussion of the week is on the Robert Owen's experiments. Well, Robert Owen is actually, I mean, in Marx, one of the most famous works, Communist Manifesto, Robert Owen is actually one of the groups he has criticized heavily. He called those groups utopian socialists. And he basically criticized them by claiming that the Robert Owen and people like him, they just describe or try to create a small version of an ideal world they had in their mind, which is a socialist world, or somehow more equal world where workers get a higher share from the returns at least, and he assumed just by seeing this example can exist, basically people will just take this case as an example, and they start to change their own part of the world. I mean, it might be a company, it might be a city, a country. They will make it more equal, increase the share of workers, and the world will in the end change. So, according to Marx, first, I mean, the creating an ideal version of a society in a small scale is very different from actually transforming the whole world to that ideal version. Well, because you can create a farm where animals in that farm are not eaten, basically, but as long as, I mean, and that won't be the problem, because the children who need protein, for example, if they need protein to survive, they can get protein from other sources. And the animals in your farm might not be touched, but getting all animals in the world into such a farm might basically damage or not be sustainable for the existing society. Well, similarly, at a small scale, maybe with support of income of others, maybe because what they produce is something special, more equal, well, a factory or a town with more equalizations might exist, but at systemic level, at the world level, that kind of equal society might create problems that cannot be seen in this small version. So, in order to create a form of better world, you should see you should first understand the material conditions, how they are connected to each other, and well, basically, the most important elements of the existing social and economic system, uh, the, and how they support the existing system. And you should then think of how, step by step, this existing system, the elements of this existing system or existing system as a whole, will transform into a new system. So you should start with the existing material world and also think about how the steps this material system might be transformed will be transformed instead of just imagining a better system. So you should not only imagine a better alternative, but you should also be able to imagine the path to that um, alternative. Without that creating that path, I mean, for the people in the actual world, might be impossible for to follow your footsteps because at systemic level, they might have problems you don't have as an idealist with more resources or opportunity to create a small vision version of a new system. Well, Robert Owen himself has a very interesting story. Actually, he has one successful, one failed experiments, and his views on the way he creates the system and he creates these experiments and basically what these experiments, in what way these experiments were beneficial or not beneficial. Those things are, well, interesting. I think those questions are interesting questions for social scientists. And basically, I think studying those experiments and the views beyond those experiments is especially interesting. I mean, especially interesting when we are considering this idealism and materialism views, basically. So as a result, I have decided that this Robert Owen's experiment is to take Robert Owen's experiment as the first discussion point. And even though Robert Owen was certainly, he was a socialist and he was a leftist, but as I said before, he was a leftist who was criticized by Marx and Engels very heavily. And you might both view his experiments and then read the criticism and then write your own opinion on the experiments of Robert Owen. What they mean for social science and what they achieve, or what did they show, what do they show, basically. And to what extent those critiques are meaningful and valuable, or to what extent they are not. Well, this is this week's lecture. I hope to see you in the next lecture, and as always, I would like to end this lecture by wishing you that you will stay healthy.